Alrighty.
And
So
why you're standing in front of the restroom?
this is all the other tables on the other lounge we're taken up. So we are with George Mason University, and we are in a migration.
Mysteries of Migration class with Professor Wood. I don't know if you know him.
Dr. Thomas Wood.
Yeah.
Tom Wood? No, I don't know Thomas Wood.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a semester-long project on a case study about monarch butterflies and the dangers that they face.
All right. And we got other questions here. Who are you guys?
So I'm Jen.
I'm
You're
Zaka.
Jan.
I'm Zaka. We're using my Skype to Skype you right now. And this is Christina.
Zaka.
Hi, I'm Christina.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Christina. Wait a minute. Where'd you go?
Hi.
She's recording.
I'm the recorder.
This is complicated. You're in. Okay.
It
that's
is.
fine.
Yeah, there's two others, but they're not here right now. So.
That's all right.
Oh, so you guys are carrying a load for two other freeloaders, huh? But I know how that works. You know, I've been a faculty member for 49 years, so I have a pretty good idea how it all works. So these team games, okay.
So where's your office? First of all, I didn't.
Well, my office is on West Campus at the University of Kansas
Oh wow.
in Lawrence, Kansas.
Okay.
And the organization that I represent is Monarch Watch, which is a program that I created in 1992.
Wow.
What made you want to create this program?
Well, there's a long story. I mean, my life story is that I've had to kind of reinvent myself at various times in my career. And starting in 1992, I kind of started to reinvent myself as a monarch biologist. And the reason for that was that the honeybee work that I was doing at that time, I had worked for almost, 18 years by that time on the so-called killer bees in South America. Oh, wow. And you may or may not have heard of them. But anyway, I knew that work was coming to an end, so I needed to find another thing to work on because I knew there wasn't going to be any money to work with honeybees the way that I had been working with honeybees. Mm-hmm. So I altered my career so as to meet the idea that I could do something else that would be productive, but without having to rely on federal funding for the honeybee work.
Right. So why the monarch butterfly?
Well, I was using monarch butterflies in a graduate course to try to teach graduate students how to do some field biology, and it just struck me that monarchs were really they provided a great opportunity to work with students, and as I looked into it, it was very clear that there were a lot of unanswered questions about the migration.
Oh yes.
That many things were not known, and in spite of the fact that there had been quite a bit of study about monarch butterflies, quite a few things had not been resolved as to the migration, and it's still the fact that a lot of things have not been resolved. I mean, there's still things that we're learning about the migration that we didn't know.
So you said you started working on the monarch butterfly since 1992, correct?
That's correct.
Alrighty. Researching the Life Without Borders Agreement, do you think that America should send some type of reinforcements to enforce legislation that is in place to protect overwintering monarchs in Mexico?
So the Mexican situation presents quite a few difficulties. There's a large resident population there. The average daily wage for somebody, the average amount that these people earn on a daily basis, if they're employed at all, is around $10 or $12.
Oh wow.
They're making $1 an hour.
Wow.
Effectively, and trying to support families that way. And so that's a challenge. And one of the major resources in the area is the trees.
Right.
And the problem with the trees as a resource is that they're very valuable. A mature tree is worth about $300. That's almost, that's almost a month's wage for a person there.
Right.
And so the temptation in many of these areas where people are unemployed is to sneak out a few trees here and there. Now they won't get $300 for them; somebody else will, but they might get, say, a third of that, or a fifth of that, or a sixth of that. But it's still worth it, because if they can get a tree out of that forest, and with a couple of days' effort, they could still make more money than they would if they were doing somebody's labor. So, and lots of times they can't even find jobs. So there's a human dimension here. There's vast unemployment. There's low wages, demands for these families. So it's really hard to manage that. Now the question has always been, how do we protect the forest down there? And that's what you're asking. There's no easy solution. One of the problems with these situations in the Americas is that if you send somebody in there to be a guard or a guide, they can be easily compromised.
Right.
And I think you probably know that, right? There's the money talks, threats make a difference. So probably the most sensible approach that I've heard to this would be to have the Mexican army move into this area and to be on patrol, but to only be there for each unit to only be present for 2 or 3 months. In other words, after you're there 2 or 3 months, or maybe 6 months, you're replaced by somebody else. And the idea of that is to minimize the chance of corruption and threats that would compromise their ability to protect the forest. In other words, if you have a constantly rotating management system, this seems to make more sense to me and to a lot of other people, than to have people in place that could be easily compromised. People in place for a long time. So, I mean, that's an idea. Having an international force come in there would probably alienate all of the local people in a significant way. So you have to be sensitive to the local conditions and the attitudes of the local people. One of the things that makes the monarch conservation so complicated is that this reserve area is actually something like 97 different independently operating communities. And that comes down to ejidos and indigenous properties, and with a few federal properties mixed in. So the federal properties should be protected, but they're not. Last year there was about a 9-hectare deforestation in one of the federal properties. So in other words, the federal people don't even have anybody there that can protect their own property. The ejidos protect their own property reasonably well, but they also exploit their own property. And so there are a couple of renegade ejidos that go in and steal trees from other ejidos, and an ejido is, you know what an ejido is? It's kind of a communal group. It might consist of 4 families, it might consist of 20 families, and they operate on a communal basis. In other words, everybody in this community contributes to the whole, to the benefit of the whole. And then nobody is allowed really to get ahead. In other words, this is really kind of a communist system. So when I say a commune, I mean a commune. This is a community in which everybody contributes to the central pocketbook, and everybody derives benefits from everybody else's work. Well, you know how those things work. I mean, somebody's always cheating, somebody's always trying to get ahead, and it's very, very difficult. Sometimes you have good communal organization, sometimes you don't. So here you have these 97 communities and in this reserve, and they have different political structures, they have different ways of management, they have strong leadership in some and weak leadership in others, and so it's it's like a whole bunch of cats in a bag. I mean, this is basically a very confused situation. And here's another complication there. There are a half a dozen ejidos, maybe more, that directly benefit from the tourism, and the others do not. So the ones that are not benefiting from this program support it much less in terms of trying to maintain the structure and integrity of the system. So the people that have the most money invested, as always, are the ones that are the most likely to protect the system. The ones that are least involved with the whole tourism industry and so on and so forth have less interest. Now, there's been some attempt to distribute money to all of the ejidos and indigenous properties. By indigenous properties, I mean that there are native Indian properties as well. In other words, there are people who are of original Mexican native extraction who have native communities there, and they tend to be really on the outside. Now, they tend not to be involved in a lot of the violations of the logging idea, but they tend to be really isolated from the rest of the society. In other words, they're not mixed in like a lot of the other ejidos are. A lot of the other ejidos, the members of the ejidos, have a lot of mixed ancestry, whereas some of the indigenous properties, the ancestry is not mixed. They're not part of the overall, as closely knit with the overall structure of the Mexican society. There's also another thing in Mexico that makes these things difficult to manage, and that is that the federal government is not as strong as it is, say, in the United States, which means that the states have more power in Mexico than the feds often do. And so the states are a little bit more independent in Mexico than they are in the United States. What that means is that the federal government allows the states to make a lot of the decisions. And the decisions the states make are very often not they're not, how should I say this gently, they're not as wise as they might be. And they're often compromised by local politics. So, I mean, you can understand how that might work, right? So.
Okay, so another question that we had for you was, so do you know what monoculture farming does to basically the pollinators, like monarch butterflies, for example? So do you think monoculture farming should be stopped? And what's your opinion on that?
Well, it's not going to be stopped. I mean, and it probably doesn't have much of an impact on monarch butterflies, except that where you have tremendous amounts of very intensive agriculture, you eliminate the host plants. If you're talking about the breeding areas in the United States, you go to places like Minnesota, Iowa, the eastern Dakotas, eastern Kansas, eastern Nebraska, parts of Missouri, Illinois. All of those areas are so intensely farmed that there's very little habitat left for monarch butterflies. And those are the most productive areas for monarch butterflies. So, yeah, they're all monocultures, but monarch butterflies don't pollinate them. Bees generally don't pollinate any of those crops. There are grain crops, there are corn crops, there are soybean crops. And so this is kind of a breadbasket sort of an area, but a high intensity agriculture, but the real problem there is loss of habitat.
Yeah, it's the milkweeds, right? The milkweeds basically are what the farmers are cutting down when they make these farms, and then what do you think about that?
Well, so here's what you guys can do. You can go to our website, and you can go to our blog, and you can go back through various things I've written in the blog, and you can look at the things that I put together on the blog about this intensification of agriculture and the consequences of it. And in some of those blog postings, this is the Monarch Watch website. Go to the Monarch Watch website and go to the blog. And some of those postings, there are a lot of research articles that establish how much habitat has been lost and what the consequences are, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of data. I mean, we could talk about this in general terms in this conversation, but there is a lot of specific data that documents the fact that the corn that used to grow in soybean fields and cornfields just doesn't occur there anymore. And because of the adoption of Roundup Ready corn and soybeans. And so there's been a tremendous loss of habitat, probably in an area the size of the state of Texas. And that's driven the population down. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
What about Monsanto, which is a pesticide company? They recently gave some donations to the monarch conservation.
Right.
Do you think that's a political statement or?
Well, I'm kind of close with the Monsanto guys. I've worked with them all of the time, and they have given us money to actually distribute 200,000 milkweed plants for restoration.
Oh, wow.
So, they and we are also benefiting from a grant right now to restore habitat in Oklahoma, based on contributions that they made to the National Fish and Wildlife Federation. So Monsanto's putting money back into this, even though their herbicides have had a big impact on monarch butterflies. They're putting money back into it.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of, some people will say, well, gee, you shouldn't accept their money. They're the cause of the problem. Well, yeah, but there are facts of life here, and the facts of life is the damage has been done. Now the question is, can we use their money to undo some of the damage? And that my answer is, yeah, if they're willing to provide money to undo some of the damage they've done, I'll help them. We'll facilitate undoing some of that damage. That's my attitude.
Okay.
Do you think that the monarchs will ever get to the point where they are added onto the endangered species list? Hopefully not, but your opinion.
Probably not the endangered species list, but they could be declared as threatened. So there are different levels.
Right.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
All right. So if they're really endangered, that would be super serious. But I don't see that happening because monarchs are really widely distributed. What really is endangered is the migration. So everything that we're trying to do is to promote activities that will keep the migration going.
What are some of those activities that you are promoting?
Well, a lot of it has to do with developing partnerships with people who are willing to put plants in the ground, people who are engaged in habitat restoration, people who are really interested in conserving pollinators, ground nesting birds, small mammals, things of that sort. The monarchs are really a species that symbolize a larger issue, and the larger issue is that we're losing pollinator habitat. As we lose monarch habitat, we lose pollinator habitat. Well, pollinators keep the system together, right? If you lose your pollinators, you lose your plant diversity, you lose a lot of your native plants. It's a cascade, it's a negative cascade. So we have to maintain the integrity of the system because that system supports us. And part of maintaining that integrity is maintaining the pollinators. Well, nobody cares about pollinators. Nobody even knows what pollinators are. I mean, there are lots of little species of pollinators. The average person in the public has no idea how important pollinators are.
Right.
So the monarch butterflies are effectively the lead in this whole idea of protecting the system by protecting the pollinators and creating habitats and maintaining habitats for pollinators. So we argue that we have to maintain the monarch migration, and that's true. But really, the more important thing in the larger context, in the long-term context, is maintaining the integrity of the system because that system supports us. I mean, we can't turn everything into agriculture. We can't turn everything into a monoculture. I mean, it goes back to your question before. You can't turn everything into a monoculture. If you do, you end up, as they do in China. There are parts of China where they have to hand pollinate their crops. Because they do have they've just virtually eliminated everything. You go to parts of China and you don't even see a bird. You can't see any birds, and the reason for that is that there's nothing for the birds to feed on. What do you need for the birds to feed on? Well, you need diversity of plants, because the diversity of plants supports the diversity of insects that the birds feed on. I mean, come on, folks. I mean, it's a complicated world out there. And everything is connected. If you want birds, you got to have insects, and you got to have pollinators to pollinate the plants to produce the insects. It's connected. And, if we don't want to live in a really sterile world, we have to maintain a lot of those connections. And we're really good at breaking them, right? Yeah. We're very good at breaking these natural connections.
All right, so the last question we're going to leave you with is basically, so do you fear with the new president-elect, do you think he's going to have a negative impact on basically life without borders agreements, international treaties we might have with his, basically?
Yeah, so what we hear from that side of the aisle and what is actually going to happen are often two different things, right? I mean, you've probably already witnessed that a lot of the things that were said in the campaign are not being said right now, and a lot of these things probably can't come through. There's an interesting thing. A lot of people are wringing their hands and are really very disappointed in what's going on, because this president doesn't seem to have any interest in science and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But believe me, he is going to get a lot of up-to-speed sort of education about how important science is, how important climate change is. The military has to look ahead. The military is probably the only part of our system that really looks ahead. They have to anticipate all the developing scenarios. And a lot of those developing scenarios, well, you can look out 10, 20, 30 years, are dependent on what they know about climate change. I'm counting on the military to tell the president-to-be, that we have to pay attention to climate change, simply because this is going to determine our military security in the future. If we don't understand how the climate is going to change, we're not going to be prepared, and we have to be prepared. So I think the military is going to lean in on this. And there's already something like 2,500 scientists that have leaned in on this. And there's going to be a lot of the medical information coming out and saying, you've got to support the medical part of the science. And I think the Republicans generally have been very supportive of medical science. I mean, they all have families. They all know somebody who's had serious illnesses with it, and that's a constant battle. There's food security issues. There are issues with regard to things like Zika viruses and all those sorts of things. And we've got to be prepared. Otherwise, we end up with a pandemic. There's already a big shield out there. The United Nations has a big shield out there. I've been watching the news the last couple of days. In Holland, they killed how many? Tens of thousands of ducks and chickens because of a bird flu outbreak. In Japan, just yesterday or the day before, they killed another tens of thousands of ducks and chickens in Japan because of a bird flu outbreak. And so we have a network of science around the world that is trying to keep us from experiencing another pandemic like we did in the, what they call the Spanish flu from 1914 to 1917 or 19. That took out 50 million people. And 50 million people is not trivial, and we've got a lot more people on the planet now, and we spread these things by airplanes at a rate that is just unbelievable. So we've got this network out there that is trying to protect us, and people don't even know about it, but there's a lot of vigilance out there on the worldwide basis, and that has to be supported. And it's science. And so, irrespective of the fact that we have now we have a president who apparently knows very little about science, he's going to be educated that these things are necessary. And I would expect that he would respond positively, because these are all threats to national security. They are. And so when anything comes down as a threat to national security, I can't see them neglecting that. Right. Now, in terms of dealing with environmental issues, that's another thing. because there are certain environmental issues they probably aren't interested in. But overall, the larger environmental issues they're going to have to pay attention to. The climate change issue is something they're going to have to deal with, and they're going to have to, they can't ignore it. But the things like restoring habitats and things of that sort, we're probably going to have to lean on the Republican donors, because there are a lot of private Republicans who really are strongly supportive of conservation. And they run foundations, and they have a lot of money, and we're probably going to have to tap into them to keep a lot of the conservation movements going.
Alrighty. So that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you so much for basically
your time.
Yes,
informing
thank
us
you.
so much.
All right. Well, good luck, and enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Where are you from? You born in the States or
Oh yeah, Virginia. I was
South Korea.
South Korea. Okay.
South Korea? Okay.
California.
California?
Yeah.
All right.
We're we're in George Mason, like 20 minutes outside of DC.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know the area.